Welcome back to the Bonsai Wire Builders podcast. We're coming to you live from Jonas's studio here, and so we're doing a little bit of a dual recording. So you're all in for a treat. I'm joined by Jonas Dupuich as well as Bob Potts. So Bob was up here visiting, and we wanted to take advantage of the chance to chat. So, Bob is very well known in the Bay Area bonsai community as well as in the bonsai Reddit community. And so I'm really excited for him to get a chance to, or for us to get a chance to learn more about him and chat today. So Bob, thank you very much for taking the time.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Cool. Jonas, I don't know if you want to just chime in. So
Hello.
we know you're around. All right, perfect. So we were thinking of structuring this a little bit of chatting a bit about Bob's bonsai journey and his experience getting into making and selling bonsai pottery, and then jump into the greater North American bonsai community in general around pottery. So looking forward to the conversation today.
Sounds great.
Nice.
I'm in.
Yeah, we've got you captivated. So Bob, do you want to kind of give a little bit of intro to your bonsai journey to date? Like, how did you learn bonsai and how long have you been doing bonsai? And then I think your pottery journey is very intertwined with that. So I'd love to hear a touch on that.
Sure.
Which we're going to get deeper into. And then finally, talk to me a little bit about your goals in bonsai. Like, what do you want to do?
Yeah. So I've been doing bonsai for a little over 25 years now. Always loved trees growing up, would be climbing trees every day at my house. And then in college, I had a crush on a girl who moved to Japan for a year to teach English. And so we were corresponding back and forth. This was pre-internet, pre-email. So we were writing letters back and forth. And so she would send me interesting things about Japan, and I would tell her about what's going on back here in the States. And so that was when I first kind of started getting interested in Japanese culture in general. And I actually don't remember if she specifically sent me something about bonsai, or if just in my own interest about Japan, I discovered it on my own. I don't remember the first time I actually saw a bonsai tree, but as soon as I did, it was kind of love at first sight.
Oh, that's interesting. So Japan or Japanese culture truly was the bridge into bonsai for you. I feel like of the folks I've talked to, I feel like there's kind of two main archetypes, and I'm curious which one you fall into, Jonas. But there's people that really love nature and the mountains and trees, or like had a special relationship with gardening in that sense, and then fell into bonsai. It was the natural continuation. And then there was people, which it sounds like you kind of had that as well, Bob. But
A little bit of both.
But and then there's the other side of like, really into Japanese culture and found this compelling thing through that.
Which was it for you?
Oof. I think for me, it was definitely the former. Like, I didn't have any special affinity to Japanese culture when I got into bonsai. I just always have like this image emblazoned into my mind of like a hike that I was doing in Bryce Canyon when I was younger, and seeing this like pine alone in the orange sand stretching out over a cliff. And like, that was like, whoa, that's cool. Like, I love that. I want that. Yeah.
And I grew up looking at Japanese gardens and really liked pines actually in Japanese gardens. They were one of my favorite trees before bonsai meant anything. I always knew what it was, but it wasn't a big deal until I was exposed to someone who actually was doing bonsai work. But the connection was definitely through just ornamental gardens.
Interesting.
How did you get the connection from the tree you saw in nature to bonsai?
Actually, so I grew up on the East Coast, and there isn't like a big, or at least where I was in rural Pennsylvania, there wasn't a big like Asian influence. And so I just didn't have a lot of, there weren't a lot of people doing bonsai or even other just Asian arts. And when I first came out to California, I saw a guy selling bonsai on a stand on the side of the road.
One of the
and
white
I got
vans.
a little book, and I got a little book, and I got 2 little trees, and that, like, so California actually started my bonsai journey. Did you grow up on the West Coast?
Midwest.
Oh, okay.
Does anyone know where those white van bonsai people come from? I call them the bonsai mafia because they're everywhere.
They're all over.
Anywhere you go, there's a white van with a guy selling bonsai trees. And as far as I'm aware, they don't come to the bonsai club meetings, and we don't see them at the bonsai shows. Where are these people coming from?
Or is it one guy that happens to be in all places at all times?
That's what I like to imagine it is.
Addison didn't want her to keep it a secret, but I'll spoil the secret. He's going to interview the bonsai van guy in an upcoming episode, and then we'll learn all there is to know about the bonsai van life.
Okay. Now I have to scramble to find the mysterious van man.
Oh, they'll show up. They actually show up right here in the East Bay. I've seen them in Oakland on various roads leading away from the Oakland airport.
Oh, interesting.
Napa's a regular one. They're out there all the time.
Moss Landing down south of Watsonville and Santa Cruz. There's one pretty often down there as well. I've never stopped because I think I'll probably just be too mad.
And they're showing up at more markets as well. I don't know if it's the same people or different, but when you go to street fairs in summer, there'll often be bonsai booths with almost the exact same kind of supply. Pretty much 1 in 5 gallon junipers in bonsai pots.
Yeah. So what did your early bonsai education look like then? You fell in love with the idea of it, and you connected with it, but then how did you start learning?
Yeah, so I was in medical school by then, and so didn't really have any spare time for thinking about anything else. So I would occasionally, if I was at a used bookstore and saw a book on bonsai, I would grab it just to look through. And so it was just something that I liked, but hadn't really tried at all. And then when I finished med school and moved to the Chicago suburbs for residency, so now I had a house and a yard and room to start doing things. So I started kind of acquiring some plants and playing around with it. And then my wife at the time bought me my first bonsai tree. It probably came from a white van at the side of the road. It was one of those typical Malsai junipers. And even though I had kind of a vague knowledge of bonsai and I liked them, I didn't really still at that point know anything about how to take care of them. So I put the little juniper Malsai on my TV in my living room, and it looked great. And I was surprised when it started turning brown and eventually died. And so at that point, I decided, well, if I like bonsai, I should probably actually learn how to take care of them so I don't just keep buying them and killing them. And fortunately, there was a bonsai nursery in the Chicago area at that time that was having classes. So I started taking classes, which I enjoyed. And then I started working at the bonsai nursery on my days off, getting paid in store credit so I could buy more little bonsai trees and take those home. And so that was from 97 through 2005-ish. I joined the local bonsai club, became an officer in the club, displayed at the local shows, got my first ribbons. Colin Lewis was a judge, gave me a nice big rosette for my first Mame display. And so I was really, really enjoying it and learning. Around then was when the online forums first were starting as well. So I was getting on, the main ones at that time were Bonsai Talk and Garden Web, if you remember Garden Web or not, Jonas. And there was like some people were on Garden Web and some people were on Bonsai Talk, and they were like always talking bad about the other one. It was kind of a bonsai rivalry.
Those were the big Walter Paul, Andy Rutledge days.
Yes.
Those two spilled a lot of ink.
Yes.
About bonsai.
Yes.
Actually, Addison, you have no idea how much ink. Like these are like 1 to 2,000 word essays coming out once or twice a week for about a couple of years.
Because for a while, you couldn't even post pictures yet. It was all just text initially.
It was lots
so
of
we were
essays.
just talking about bonsai online.
And the discussions got really heated on occasion. Like there were some very hot topics back then. It was really funny.
Yeah. And then one of the other big writers on the early bonsai internet at the time was Brent Walston from Evergreen Garden Works. And so I started reading everything that he wrote, and he was selling trees online, so I bought a few trees from him. And then around 2004-5-ish, I had finished residency. I was in private practice for a few years already, and financially it wasn't really going well for me. And I decided I needed to sell the practice, start fresh, new somewhere else. And I was getting more passionate about bonsai at that point. So I decided if I'm going to move somewhere and start a new job somewhere, I'm going to look and see if I can find a job near some sort of bonsai nursery or teacher or something.
No way. That was a factor in your...
completely,
cool.
100%.
I tell this story all the time. Like, I've known this about Bob for years, and like, because you underscored that point early on when we met, and it's like, no, people will move across the country just to be close to bonsai.
Yeah.
And so you're not the only one, but you're my best example of that.
So I emailed Brent from Evergreen Garden Works, and I said, hey, if I happen to find a day job somewhere near you, could I, come out and work 1 day a week at your nursery, be, some sort of apprentice? And he was like, well, come on out, let me meet you and take a look at the place and we'll see. And turns out there was a clinic 20 minutes from his nursery that had a job opening. So I applied for the job at the clinic, and I came out and interviewed at the clinic and interviewed at Brent's, and we got along great. He's such a cool guy. So I moved all the way across the country for a new job and a very, very part-time apprenticeship. I was basically there 1 day a week for 3 years.
That's awesome. I mean, that's more time than most people get with bonsai. The consistency and being able to get that experience over all the seasons for multiple years, I'm sure was really awesome.
Yeah, it was great. Unfortunately, the day job didn't turn out to be quite as great as I liked. Also, the location up in Lake County, we never really felt like we fit in there. It's very remote feeling. Lake County isn't on the way to anywhere else. There's no roads that pass through it, so only people that are going there are people that intentionally want to go there. And it's got a big lake. It's nice for fishing and water sports, and there's some wineries and stuff. But you have to go over kind of a windy mountain pass road anyway into the county. And so once you get in there, it's a big effort to go anywhere else again. And there's not a lot there in the county itself. There was like one Target and one Walmart and a handful of restaurants, and that was it. So it was a big adjustment coming from Chicago suburbs.
Yeah.
It feels like Appalachia, very, very rural and remote.
That's all very accurate about that place. I grew up just a couple hours away, but it was like another planet out there. And believe it or not, Brent's was one of the first nurseries I ever visited.
Oh, yeah?
But we didn't, within weeks, I think, of getting excited about bonsai, my dad and I flew to Brent's nursery.
Oh.
My dad had a pilot's license at the time, and so we took a little Cessna 171, and we actually flew up to the Ukiah airport, and I bought every single large thing that he would sell, large being gallon cans at the time. This was at his old nursery, not his new place.
Yeah.
And we literally filled up the plane with gallon can, leptospermum, and all these just super random odds and ends. And then flew back home. But yeah, that tells you how remote feeling it was, as we essentially landed in a dirt strip a couple hours north of here. And it's not that far away. It really isn't.
It really isn't. It feels much further than it is.
But as soon as you get past Napa, it's just like there's just a lot of brown grass and oaks out there.
Wow. Yeah. These are cool stories. I'm excited to hear these. I feel like some of the the first bonsai forum I was familiar with was like Bonsai Nut and when I first started in bonsai, when I was still kind of like it was just kicking around in my head, but I wasn't in a place where I could make these decisions to, I was still, moving once a year for school and stuff like that. It's hard in college, it's hard to do bonsai in that environment, right? So, but you still have it kicking around in your head, which it sounds like is similar to you, Bob. And then it kind of gets activated at some point in your life, like your ex or your wife at the time giving you a tree, for example. So yeah, that's interesting.
So my time there was really great. We were able to bring in some outside folks for some workshop kind of stuff. We had Marco Invernizzi there for a weekend, and we had Walter Paul there for a weekend. So that was really fun. During that time, we also took a road trip up to Oregon to see. My brain. The guy
Was
who-
Michael Hagedorn
no,
back then? Or,
he was there, but we didn't
um,
see him. The guy who collects the
Randy.
trees. Randy Knight. Sorry, Randy. I apologize for forgetting your name. So we went up to see Randy Knight. Walter Paul was up. This was a year or so later. Walter Paul was back and was doing workshops up there. So Brent and I drove up there and met Randy, and we bought some trees and looked at his field growing area, because Brent obviously has a lot of experience with field growing. So I really enjoyed my time there at Brent's, and unfortunately ended sooner than I had planned. When the day job got sufficiently bad enough that I decided I had to quit that job and find a new one. And that's when I moved down to Santa Cruz, where I am now, in 2008.
Nice.
And so I don't know if you know much about Brent's operation up there, but at the time, Brent was one of the most prominent online voices in bonsai, period. And throughout his career, he has been one of the kind of foremost authorities on cultivars. Brent specialized in, like, he goes deep. His catalog at one point must have been 20, 30 pages of cultivars that no one else knew even existed. And so
he was propagating them all.
Yeah, and he was propagating them all. And so he actually had this amazing catalog with descriptions of, here's the name of the cultivar, here's a few sentences descriptor of it, and he made and could tell you how to grow all of these things. And
Wow.
so he was a little picky about who he'd want to sell stuff to, because they were his babies. And so buying something from him wasn't like hitting a buy button at the time. It's more like you'd have a conversation and you'd find out, what are you looking for?
He'd take you
And-
into the back greenhouse.
well,
that
it was no, this was all online. So he
Oh, okay.
typically refused to have visitors for most of his time. Like, people would occasionally come by, but that was always the exception. This was all epistolatory, or when the time came, email-based correspondence. And so you would just kind of write back and forth, like, this is kind of my growing environment, or this is what I'm looking for. He'd help you out. And he's like, well, I've got some of these, or I might have some older stuff there. And he's a great guy and a fun character to hang out with, but one of the, if not the best authority on just knowing 10 million cultivars of pine, of ume, of like things that you didn't know had cultivars. And so his expertise was really is unique among American bonsai people.
Wow.
www.evergreengardenworks.com. You should definitely check it out. It's very old school. I don't think he's updated his website since 2009, maybe. He's got a ton of articles on there that are very educational. And then all his online sales is still happening. And he's got some big stuff too now that he's offering for sale as well. So definitely check it out if you haven't.
Yeah, you were talking about old school articles, and then that just makes me think like, oh, people are consuming a lot of videos now. So, what's the next thing going to be? Like, videos are going to be like, oh, you have Instagram reels of your content. Like, that's old school. And then it'll be like direct brain downloads or something like that in the future for teaching, I guess. I don't know. We'll see what it is. Full of VR immersive classroom. I don't know, but it's interesting to see how like the way that we learn bonsai has changed over time.
I tried making a couple videos while I was there. I shot a fair amount of footage and only ever managed to edit 1 or 2 videos together, because I had my day job, and then I had little kids, and so I was never really able to devote the kind of time to it that I wanted.
One thing that it seems like fairly early in your bonsai journey, you oriented yourself towards like, I'm going to make these sacrifices to do bonsai. And yeah, I feel like that's not an easy thing to do. Like make sacrifices to, pursue this pursuit or pursue bonsai. And can you take me through like, what was your thought process, or was it something that you had to think a lot about, or you just kind of like, it just felt natural and you did it? Like, how did you make that decision to, sacrifice certain things so that you could pursue bonsai?
Yeah, at the time it didn't really feel like a sacrifice, when the decision to move from Chicago to California, because my practice was going so poorly there. My wife had quit her job as well because her job wasn't going well. So we were in a bad place. And so any move we would have done would have been an improvement. And since we could have moved anywhere and taken a job anywhere, we decided together. She agreed. But we decided to go to somewhere where I could, further the bonsai, because it was a passion. So it definitely didn't feel like a sacrifice at the time. The next move, when we had to move away from there, did feel like a sacrifice, because now I was moving away from bonsai. I was having to give up my close access to my bonsai teacher, because I needed a different day job, and I needed my wife to live in a town that she didn't despise. So I, at that point, I was sacrificing my bonsai side for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And so I had to kind of put bonsai on hold for a while after that.
And so that's a good way to put it is, and I hear you talk about this a lot, Addison, when you're talking to people about what sacrifices are made to learn bonsai. And yeah, your sacrifice was on normal life by living where you were for bonsai. And that's not the kind of sacrifice you're often thinking about. But when you think, if bonsai is a hobby and not a living, what are you sacrificing? What is the default thing humans being do when they're not getting paid? Watch TV, nap, take walks on the beach? Like, at some point we do things to fill our free time, to give ourselves meaning. And so it always feels like more of an opportunity often. Now, if it feels like, oh, sorry, I'd go camping this weekend, but I have to water my bonsai, or sorry, I'd go skiing this weekend, but I have to ski. Well, then that means you'd rather be doing those other things than doing the bonsai. Then it feels like more of a sacrifice.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess when I think about it, it's like, from my own context, it's like, oh, if I didn't have bonsai, I might travel in a different way than I do now, right? Or it just like reduces your flexibility to some extent, right? Like
to a big
having
extent.
having a very static hobby that requires daily maintenance. Like, if you are otherwise unburdened, that can feel like a sacrifice, right? Or, for example, Sam Tan bought his primary vehicle that is a Ford Transit connector, like one of those type van things, right? Just to carry bonsai around. So, to some person, like, that might not be a sacrifice, right? But to other people, it might be like, oh, like, what about my Ferrari, or I don't know, whatever, what about my regular car that I want to drive around?
I know at least one guy who drives bonsai to workshops in his Ferrari on occasion.
Some people don't have to make any sacrifices, I guess. But, yeah. So when did the pots part of Bob Potts come around?
Yeah, so that was a little bit later. So let's see. So 2008, moved to Santa Cruz, and didn't join the Santa Cruz Club right away, just because I was busy with a new job. And then in 2009 or 2010, I participated in the Joshua Roth. It was called the New Talent in Bonsai contest. At that time, it was way out on the East Coast that year. And at that point, the rules were you had to be within 10 years of when you started bonsai. And so I was coming up on, like, my 10-year window was closing. So I had to go, even though it was all the way across the country. So I went and competed in that. Didn't win, but I had a good time. And someone bought my tree afterwards. So I was happy with that. And then, so that's 2010. For the next 5 years or so, I was just kind of doing my own thing, not really super involved, not spending as much time online. Just, again, life and my new job and younger kids, and my son has some health problems, so that took up a lot of our time. So I wasn't spending as much time with bonsai during that particular window of time. Then in 2015, by then my son's health was a little more stabilized, so we were having a little bit more time. My wife and I decided to start doing some date night activities to get out of the house. She had done pottery previously when we lived in Chicago. She would do a girls' night out, and they would go to a pottery studio and make pots together. So she had continued doing some pottery, and so she said, "Hey, there's a pottery place in town in Santa Cruz. Do you want to come and do pottery together?" I had never been interested in it at all. I've never really done much artistic kind of things other than the bonsai trees itself, but obviously bonsai involving pots. I liked bonsai pots. I was buying bonsai pots for my bonsai trees. So I thought, oh yeah, I could go try to make a bonsai pot and see how it goes. And so that's how it started.
It's funny how there's so many side quests in bonsai. Like you get into bonsai for the trees, and then it's like, oh well, I need pots and I could do pottery, or oh, I need stands and I could do carpentry, or all these different things, which is kind of funny.
So we went to it's a community studio, so you pay a monthly fee. And you can go a certain number of hours a month. You buy the clay there. They have all the glazes. They have all the tools. They do all the firing. So it was you just basically come and play with the clay. So I started off trying to do hand building. I wasn't really interested in the wheel. I just in my very brief research, it seemed like there's a pretty big learning curve to get good at wheel throwing. And I decided I didn't really want to go down that road. So I figured I would just do hand building. I would roll out some slabs, piece them together, make pots that way. Turns out that's way harder even. But I didn't realize that at the time.
So for folks who might not know, can you give a summary of what wheel throwing versus hand building versus mold building is, or whatever methods there are for actually building bonsai pots?
Sure. So wheel throwing, pottery wheel spins around. You put a lump of clay on the pottery wheel, and you basically can make a round pot as it's spinning. And so it's a pretty fast way, once you learn the techniques, to build a round pot shaped thing. You can also make pitchers or mugs or whatever else. Round pots have kind of a limited use in bonsai, so I figured I'm not going to spend a lot of time learning how to make round pots because I don't really need that many round pots. So slab building is more similar to carpentry, where you roll out these flat slabs of clay, and then you connect them together. So if you think of like you're building a box out of wood, you've got your various pieces of wood, and you connect them together in a box shape. Same kind of process, but with slabs of slightly hardened clay. So it's still soft and malleable, but it gets to a harder consistency if you let it dry a little bit. So you put the pieces together, and then you can have a box kind of shape for your bonsai pot. Sounds easy, but the actual doing of it is quite challenging, because you've got all those seams where all the different pieces fit together. You have to get them to basically merge and become a solitary thing. And if you're pushing them together, and now you've pushed it out of shape, so it's not a square anymore, now it's some kind of lumpy other shape, or if you're not pushing it enough, then it doesn't really fuse and it falls apart in the kiln. So I didn't have a lot of success with my hand building pots. However, the extra bits of clay that I had left over, I kind of discovered the technique of carving out a lump of clay into a pot shape. So I'd have this little lump of leftover bits of clay, and I'm like, oh, why don't I just dig out the inside of that, and it looks like a pot. So that is an actual Japanese technique called kuranuki, where they make sake cups and all kinds of other things by basically carving out a lump of clay. And so I kind of independently discovered that myself, because there wasn't really any instruction happening at the studio. People were all just kind of doing their own thing. And if you had a question, you could ask the guy. It's like, oh, how do I do this? And he would, give you answer your question. But there wasn't really like instruction going on. So I was basically just figuring it out all on my own. So I discovered this kind of kuranuki carving technique. So you start with a block of clay. You kind of hollow out the inside, and then you can shape the outside, and you can carve little feet on it, and you put in your drainage holes, and now you've got a little pot. They turned out kind of cute. I liked them, and then other people started liking them, and people started wanting to buy them from me, which was very surprising.
So it's the kuranuki technique is almost like pot by subtraction to some extent.
Yeah.
Though you still do some forming on it. Yeah, I also got enticed by the pottery side quest as I was doing bonsai. And my first experience was just I went to a local clay, studio, and I just took their beginner class for 3 months or something like that. And the thing I was struck by was in those beginner classes, like nobody's teaching you how to make bonsai pots.
Right.
Like, on the wheel throwing class, you might be like making a small cup or a bowl. And on the hand building class, you'll do like some pinch pots and, but a lot of it is around sculpture too. And so when I showed them a picture of a bonsai pot, and I'm like, I want to make this, that's not necessarily something that just like a regular like sculptural potter is doing on a regular basis. Right. And so it was really difficult or overwhelming almost to find out even like how are bonsai pots made. And like, there's a lot of conflicting information about like, oh, you can use coils, you can use pinch pots, you can use kiranuki, you can use hand building, you can use mold building, right? But it's not always clear like which type of pottery technique yields the result that you want, right? So it's interesting that like hearing your experience about kind of like stumbling into making the types of pots you wanted to sounds about right? Given like there's just not that much education on how to build bonsai pots in the US.
Yeah, unless you're specifically seeking out a bonsai pot maker and having them instruct you, it's not something that the average ceramicist would have any experience with.
Is there even a great like if I wanted to sign up for bonsai pottery making classes, like how would I even do that right now, right?
I've never seen such a thing.
Yeah. Why would that exist?
Yeah.
There's only a handful of, well, actually, there's a ton of bonsai potters around these days, but I don't know that there's a giant appetite among general public to make bonsai pots. And so unless your ceramics instructor happens to have a connection to the bonsai world, the odds are obviously a lot lower.
Yeah.
That you'd be able to connect with someone for that. They, like Bob said, the techniques you can get, and you can get sometimes help for specific questions, but the aesthetics and some of the techniques are just so different than what a fine arts ceramicist would want to do, or someone who makes primarily usable objects. Like they're just different kinds of problems that people be solving.
Did you have trouble finding clay that would work for making bonsai pots? I know it was very overwhelming for me. It's like, first of all, I just had what they had at the studio.
Right.
And then, I didn't really know, I was interested in making unglazed containers. And so the clay is obviously very important for that. And I struggled with that a lot. So I was curious, like, what was your experience? Like, how did you settle on a clay? What characteristics ended up being good for making bonsai pots?
Yeah. So at this studio where I work, you can only use clay that you buy there. If you're not using the right kind of, there's different ways of firing the clay and different temperatures of firing the clay, and you have to match the clay you're using with the firing you're doing. And if you use the wrong kind of clay, it can blow up in the kiln and destroy everybody else's work. So they were very strict of you can only use clay that you buy from here. So basically there were 6 or 7 different clay bodies to choose from. And so I would just try each one. It's like, okay, I'll try this one this time, and next time I'll buy a bag of the other one, and just kind of kept playing around and figuring out which ones worked. And I pretty much settled on 2 main clay bodies at this time. This sandy brown kind of clay here that I brought today that's called T2, which has a grog or a gritty texture that provides a nice feel and look to it. And then the other clay I use is called Black Mountain, which turns this kind of dark chocolatey brown when you fire it. So those are the 2 I use the most because they look really nice unglazed. And then because they are kind of dark though, they don't look as good with the glaze. So if I'm specifically wanting to make a glazed pot of a certain color, they do have lighter colored clay bodies that it can use.
Okay. And then the pots that you have here today, is there like a stain on the outside of them? They're not glazed, right? But they've got some sort of like darkening stain on them?
Yes. So the current batch that I did in the last couple of batches I've been doing this way, I use an iron oxide wash. So after I've carved the pot and it's dried, then it goes into the bisque kiln. So it's a lower temperature fire. And that's fired. And then once it comes out of that, then you can either glaze it or leave it unglazed, or you can apply these oxide wash. So it's iron oxide. I sponge it on and then sponge off the excess. So, more is left in the little nooks and crannies and that kind of stuff. So it provides a little bit more contrast, a little darker in the cracks and lighter.
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
rest
You
of
can
it.
see those crackles really come out. Yeah, exactly.
So apply that iron oxide, wipe it off from the highlighted areas, and then it's fired at the higher fire kiln, and the result is this nice. The clay body itself is kind of sandy, light brown, and the iron oxide darkens it a little bit.
Yeah. So what is there a specific style of pot or like a technique that you want to explore? Are you just having fun making the pots that you're making and that's what you want to do? Or I'm just curious, like what's caught your eye right now in the pottery world?
Yeah. So, I've called my pottery page, Instagram or my store, or whatever you want to call it, rough cut pottery. So it's a very rough, rustic, naturalistic, organic kind of feel. I settled on that for two reasons, both kind of the same reason. When I initially started trying to make pots, I was trying to make the very, refined looking pots like the Japanese pots that I liked, and just discovered very quickly that I didn't have the skill level to pull that off, and I would have to be practicing for a very long time to get to that point. And this was still, just a hobby date night activity, 2 hours a week. So I didn't really have the time to devote to get good enough to make pots that were similar to what you can get, for $5 from China or whatever, So like I could work really, really, really hard and still have a pot that doesn't look that good, or I could do something completely different. And since, these little lumpy things that I were carving were turning out kind of cute and people were liking them and nobody else was really making anything like that, I'm like, okay, this is my niche. I can make them. People like them. So why the heck not?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in my little pottery journey, I also kind of started doing some of the kiranuki, and I really like, especially for smaller shapes. I loved how they were turning out like really great pots for accents and things like that, especially, right? Because you got that maybe in a display, you have a really refined Japanese pot that the actual tree is in, in a really large display, and then the accent can have some a little bit more like organic or refined nature and contrast really well. So I think the especially the what you call the stretch pots, I like that style a lot. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's fun. It's kind of a niche. Nobody else is really making pots. I mean, a few people are making pots like this, but not a lot. I also focus on small size pots, Mame and Shohin. A lot of the big name American potters are mostly making larger size pots. It doesn't take a whole lot less time to make a small pot versus making a big pot, but you can charge a lot more for a big pot versus a small pot. So if you're making your living selling pots, you're going to make big pots that you can charge more money for.
Yeah.
This again, it's just a hobby for me. It's not something I'm trying to support myself with. So I can make little pots easier and faster, and so that's pretty much what I've been doing.
That's got to be fun though to make something with your hands that people want to buy.
For sure.
I'm sure that's really gratifying.
It is, and it's so different from the rest of my life. I'm a physician, so my regular day job. At the end of my job, at the end of the day, you can't really look back and say, what did I accomplish today? It's like I signed my name a lot of times. I wrote a lot of orders in the computer and I typed a lot of notes, but you look back, it's like, what did I actually do? Whereas you spend 2 hours in the pottery studio, you start with a lump of dirt, and at the end, you've got a pot that you can use, and it's tangible. You hold it in your hand. So it's been a very nice change from the rest of my regular day-to-day life.
Yeah.
How have your designs kind of changed, if at all, as a response to what people are looking for? I know you've been vending for several years now. You have pots available for sale online now, which apparently has been really successful. It's been awesome. That's it. Getbentbonsai.com?
Yeah. So Tyler, my bonsai buddy, who Neil's Copper Wire, started a website to sell his wire, getbent.com. And he was always encouraging me to sell my pots online. I'm like, I don't want to take a bunch of pictures of my pots and spend all this time to post them and all that stuff. And he said, well, I'll do it. So he's been taking the pictures and he's been posting it up, and I split the money we make with him. So it's been nice. I can focus on just doing the part that I like, and he does the rest and gets some money for it. So it's worked out really well.
The prices have been very modest as well.
Yeah, I've never priced my pots very high because again, I'm not trying to do this to make a living. I know I'm never going to actually break even with the amount of time that I spend. I'd have to spend 2 or 3 times. I'd have to mark the price 2 or 3 times higher than what it actually is to actually make money on it. So I'm trying to price it what I feel is reasonable.
Yeah, I think the value is pretty good considering these are all unique handmade items.
Yeah.
It's pretty incredible. And as you'll see, if you look closely at the pictures online, there's a lot of pictures of each pot, so you can tell exactly what you're going to get. But whether it's the unglazed or even the glazed ones, the character works on incredibly small scales. And we can talk about some of the shapes you make too, but there's some of the ones you've done where you've layered geometric shapes kind of off center, so it creates a little bit of movement. Mm-hmm. And then when you glaze on top of that, it just creates this really neat, like you say, it's an organic take on a geometric form.
Yeah.
And the glaze happens to heat up on the corners just as you would expect it would. So you actually get this shape that would be hard to create from scratch by hand, where you're not doing it the way you're doing. And you'd never be able to get the color, were it not just an artifact of kind of the glazing and firing process. So there's some really neat, satisfying artifacts you get from taking these approaches.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so much of the details of my pots are not necessarily things that I specifically... It's like, okay, I'm going to make a little crack right here. No, that's just where the crack happened when I was making it. And then
the process, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
And so you kind of just let the pot become what it's going to become. And sometimes it turns out great and sometimes it doesn't. But the ones that turn out nice, I'm happy to have people use. And it's always great when I go to a show and I see someone displaying an accent plant in one of my pots or a tree in one of my pots. It's a great feeling.
Yeah.
Have your designs changed much since you started doing it? And if so, is that driven more by you or more by what people are looking for, or both?
So when I first started, like I said, I was trying to build these hand built, traditional kind of shapes, and gave up on that pretty quickly. The next, phase was mostly very small carved pots. And then I started experimenting with more pinch pot kind of things and some crescent pots. And the biggest trend over the 10 years has been the size. I was mostly just doing very small mame stuff first, and now I'm up to some pots that are 8, 10, 12 inches in diameter. So there's not a lot of people doing mame bonsai, and so you've got that number, and then the amount of people who are doing mame bonsai that appreciate very rustic, strange looking pots is even smaller number. So the market for my weird little pots is pretty small. So I've been trying to make larger weird pots in the hopes of finding more people that would like them.
Some of the other ones that have come out just great are some of the more sculptural pieces you're making, as if inspired maybe by a moon pot, but not at all a moon pot, more like an unfolding vase, or kind of like a folding candle is kind of the look. But there's some really neat sculptural pieces now.
Yeah, I've started making some moon pots, crescent pots. I enjoy those. They're fun to make. And then I've this other kind of pot I've been making recently. I call it a drape pot. Basically, I take a slab and kind of form it over a bowl, so it kind of looks like a piece of fabric or something like that. And so it's kind of flowing. And they're fun to make, and they turn out interesting looking. Whether anyone's ever actually able to use one for a display or not is kind of immaterial. I like making them, so I'm going to keep making them, and hopefully someday somebody will use one. It'll look good.
Well, that gets to the thing that's most interesting to me about your work is how do you talk someone through pot selection for non-traditional pots? Not many people are really clear on what the conventional pot choices are, let alone how you go off script, how you start doing that. So I'm sure you've had this conversation with people. How do you guide someone new to non-traditional work and how they might apply it to their own display practice?
Yeah, when I'm vending, people come by and it's like, "Oh, these are so cute." And I said, "Well, buy one and take it home then if you think it's so cute." Like, "Oh, I wouldn't know what to do with this, or I couldn't keep something that small alive." So yeah, people see them and like them, but it does take a few extra steps to figure out how would I actually use this in a display. And I don't know that I have any great tips or explanation to help convince people. It's either going to click for them or it's not. So I try to make some things that are, the dimensions and the so that it looks similar to the shape of a bonsai pot, but maybe the characteristics are a little different. So it's a rectangle, but maybe there's this big crack or this kind of bent out area, or the texture is different. So I'm trying to make them not so weird that you don't know what to do with them, that you can look at it and say, "Oh yeah, that's a rectangle pot. I know what to do with a rectangle pot," and hopefully they can find some way to use them.
It still reads bonsai pot with those basic perspectives.
Yeah.
So I have found just in the last couple years, I've been leaning on alternative pot designs like crazy. And here's why. If you're making very traditional bonsai, they often look good to our eyes in very traditional containers because we are habituated to see those two together. But a lot of people in the US are making bonsai pots, and around the world making bonsai that are very off the wall. We have either radically lowered our standards for or broadened our acceptance of, two sides of the same coin, collected material. And so now maybe we're going to collect bonsai that has great age and character, but horrible shape for bonsai, and we're going to use it anyway. Maybe we're growing trees from scratch, unguided by things like technique or experience, and we end up with some really idiosyncratic designs. When I see trees that don't fit an obvious pattern, the first thing I always go for is an alternative pot. And they fall into a couple different categories. Just this morning, I was looking at some trees. Brian Hollowell posted some wonderful shots of these black pines he's been growing for 10 to 12 years from seed. I don't know how many of them fit into standard bonsai styles. And it's those kinds of trees that take on just really interesting forms. I think they can look great in these non-basic rectangle, oval, square, circle containers. And when the pots have higher walls and they have a lighter feeling, I can imagine them being great for trees where there's a more slender trunk line, or the line of the trunk is far more interesting. I think really the most dramatic containers you're making look fantastic with tiny sidebar. There's kind of a trend in pot or in bonsai these days where the trees look almost better in 2 dimensions than 3. It's like Instagram-based design, we'll call it. And a lot of people are really focusing on contrast, and they're preferring negative space throughout a composition over depth when you actually look at the tree in person. Those line-based designs look really good in pots that have a line-based approach. And so as you get more interesting lines in container, I think the pots can support that as well. And then the other one would be you make a lot of low containers that are wider. Those are great for suggesting landscapes, which is another big trend where a lot of containers are resembling stones that trees might be growing out of, or simply providing a base of a landscape setting, even if it's for one tree. And so I know, and we're looking at an example of a couple here today, these lower containers that might be somewhere between the Japanese model of this wide, low, flat, rectangular oval, but a kind of a truncated, naturalistic approach to that. And so I find it really easy to recommend these kind of off the normal catalog of bonsai pot shapes, and they tend to be more and more, I'm finding, a good fit for a surprisingly high percentage of trees out there.
I agree. Another thing that I think works well with my pots are the jades, Portulacara afra. I think the ruggedness of the bark and the thick kind of juicy leaves.
It's that desert feeling.
Yeah, exactly. I think that works well with my pots.
Have you used many Addison? Just totally alternative pots, things that you wouldn't see in a Kokofu catalog?
Oof. You know, I'm a little bit of a purist.
Or do you just not have enough fun trees yet at that stage of
I
development?
guess that's true. You know, I'm very fascinated with the idea of like almost like a landscape type planting. So where the pot and like a slab type planting where it's like it just looks like a part of the environment, and you might have like moss and little rocks and things like that. So I haven't done a ton of that, but that's something that like directionally really appeals to my taste. So I could see using like slab type designs. I use some of the pots that I made myself in a little bit more organic feel. I use for like accents and things like that. For my actual bonsai trees, I'd say, you know, I tend to rely more on traditional shapes and forms. I just like going to Japan a lot. And so I actually just end up like trying to buy and bring back pottery for like my favorite trees when I'm there as like a little side quest. So I haven't used a ton of non-traditional or more contemporary containers, I'd say.
You might find that as you keep doing more beginner workshops, you have more and more opportunities to use them or put them to use. And I know, Bob, you've got plenty of traditional pots in your collection as well. It's not,
For sure.
It's like this is a piece of the puzzle rather than the entirety of the...
Right. Yeah. Obviously, these don't work for every kind of tree, and there are a lot of gorgeous, Japanese and Chinese pots, and I like to buy those as well. I think there's so many different looks you can achieve with bonsai, and so I'm happy to make my little niche of pots that I make, but I buy a lot of pots that look completely different.
This kind of gets into a topic that I'm very interested in both of your perspectives on, which is I feel like in American bonsai, whenever I was living out in Denver, for example, whenever I went to their yearly show, it was stunning. They had a much higher variety of contemporary pot shapes and colors and sizes than we do in like a typical show on the West Coast, for example. So I'm curious about this trend in US bonsai of using more like sculptural or pots that have more to say, having more of like instead of it being like a 80% tree, 20% pot in a display, it might be almost like 50-50 in some instances. So I'm curious about both of your thoughts on that trend, and I'll stop there.
Have you seen a lot of that, Bob?
I mean, there's a lot of cool, very different things happening. Even stuff like Hagedorn's doing with no pot at all. There's a lot of fun. The real bulky sculptural pots from Jonathan Cross are super cool. Those man-made rocky sort of slabs that several different people are making. There's a couple people in Europe that are making cool kind of artificial rock things. There's so many cool things out there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I find from traveling around, when you go to Japan, you see conservative bonsai design and conservative container selection. When you go to Europe, you see primarily conservative tree design and fairly wild container selection. And we're right in the middle here in the US often, where we have some trees are conservative, some are definitely not. Some containers are conservative, some are definitely not. So we're very much in the middle. I think a lot of what you saw in Denver was probably done by necessity. And so I think a lot of people either don't have access to the containers they want, or they're limited by cost, and or they want to do bonsai on their own terms. Like that's a very American idea. I don't want anyone to tell me how to do something. There's a lot of that in a lot of aspects of bonsai in the US. And I think as we take the best of that, we end up with some really fun stuff.
The other thing I really like is when folks use like just found objects and turn it into a pot. Those can be really fun and really catch your eye.
Yeah, there's a great driftwood is an underappreciated pot, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There was a fantastic giant structure at the Artisans Cup. Greg Brendan's big giant tree was planted in this huge piece of deadwood, which is awesome. Saw another one posted online just this morning, and so found objects can be super duper fun.
My friend Brock, who's apprenticing up at Mirai right now, a lot of his designs use found objects, which is cool. Like I think he found some like rusted metal at a job site one time, or like rocks, lava rock and things like that he carved. They're pretty cool.
That's right. It reminds me, I forget if it was, there was some award at the Chicago, I guess Mid-America Bonsai exhibit in Chicago this year. And one of the awards was for, I forget exactly what it was called, but it was for some kind of contemporary approach recognition. And there was an architect who used a scrap of wood, and it ended up being a really cool alternative container. And an accent was growing out of one corner of it, and the tree was growing out of the top of it. And it was just a cut off block that had this fantastic natural, I shouldn't say natural, found sculptural look to it, because it had been all these saw cuts at different angles had given it this really blocky, Jonathan Crossy-like looking for a block of wood. It was kind of fun.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one.
That was neat.
Yeah. I think there's an aspect of personal taste, obviously, right? It's like some people like really sculptural looking containers, and some people like more organic looking containers, and some people like really refined looking containers. So I don't think there's a right or wrong, but it's interesting to see the variety for sure.
Well, and at the U.S. National Bonsai Pottery Competition this year, those were the two major categories. They had traditional categories and contemporary categories. And
so what does that mean, traditional and contemporary, in the context of pottery?
So I think that was actually one area of improvement for future exhibits, in that it's hard to determine, are we talking about traditional approach or where exactly is the line? And so the winner of the traditional category was a quite flowery or florid example of the traditional form. It was almost like a fever dream of a traditional pot. And so I was kind of surprised it was even in the traditional category. And there were some vice versas in there. And so I think figuring out how to draw those lines can be challenging for a competition organizer.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I would do that now. I've been actually thinking about that a lot, as what would be meaningful categories that would allow the participating artist to know, what is my criteria for success going to be? Is it like novelty top to bottom? Is it usability for trees? Or is it craftsmanship and just raw artistry and sculptural artistic talent? Or is it some fun combination? And so as Roy and I were judging this show, that was the discussion we were having. We talked for about an hour about this. Well, this person's a great sculptor. This person made a very usable bonsai pot. This person had a great idea, but it was poorly executed. This person had amazing execution, but I've seen 2,000 of those pots before. And so, to not answer your question, but to repeat it for the world's sake, help us answer this. It really comes down to someone needs to just decide, what will success look like within a given kind of category? And then we can incentivize essentially the artist to go crazy within that vein.
So I would love to talk a little bit more about the competition and your perspectives. I only saw the pictures online. I thought it was awesome that they did it. And I think it's a great way to encourage more bonsai pottery in the US.
For sure.
Can you tell me a little bit about, give me the synopsis of your take walking through and judging the competition? And then, maybe we can dive into some individual pots and have some conversations.
Well, so I think it started with this giant call for submissions. And I forget if it was 125 or 150. It was a giant number of containers were submitted. And the submitters had to provide a number of photographs as well as an essay. I forget, like a decent sized description of what their artistic goals are and what their process is. And then there were multiple rounds of judging where there was feedback from bonsai professionals based on looking at the photos. And then there was feedback from two professionals. It might have been actually Ron Lang and Sarah Rayner, who actually read the essays and thought, do these approaches have, again, novelty, merit, interest? Is there something that they're contributing to the community by taking these approaches? And so that narrowed it down to, I think it was 85 or 87 finalists, an extraordinary number of finalists. And those were all the trees that were there live at the event. And so then Roy and I showed up as the in-person judges. And Angelica Ramirez put this whole thing together, and she did an absolutely unbelievable, amazing job. Photos of all of these containers are online if folks wants to see at arbonsaiart.com. And you can, navigate your way to the contest. The way the judging actually worked is it started with Angelica gave Roy and me a 1-hour tour of the exhibit, telling us, because it was all anonymously done, but we wanted to know, well, how is this built? Or, And so she gave us essentially the Cliff Notes versions of the essays for every single submission.
Wow.
And after an hour of that, and this is just a private tour for the three of us in the exhibit room, like the whole thing was such a great experience. Then we got to spend an hour just enjoying and appreciating and thinking about the work itself. And so Roy and I were chatting about different things, and we were actually picking up and handling the containers for, again, another hour. So 2 hours in and we hadn't started judging. Then it's like, yeah, we should probably get to work. So then the room went silent and we each went around individually judging, providing 2 scores per tree or per pot. I'm used to scoring trees. And it's funny, we scanned QR codes and we had to move sliders to award points for, I think it was essentially build quality or construction related stuff, as well as artistic or usability type.
Okay, so those were the 2 criteria, essentially?
Yeah, it's some level.
How many
those
points
were
were on the
things.
scale, though?
And I forget, it might have been 7 points each, something like that.
Okay.
There was an original plan, and then I actually was working with Angelica about it, and I thought, that comes out to we'd have to assign, I think, 670 points within an hour, and that doesn't seem super tenable. And so we kind of simplified and streamlined from there. But it ended up working really well because we had taken that time to go through everything. It went really quickly. So then a third hour, then I was able to score all the trees in there. We hung out. There was a little tiebreaker we had to figure out, and then they posted the awards. But it was the coolest experience. Like, can you imagine walking around a museum where you can handle everything?
That does sound really cool.
It was just like, is this pot heavy? Is it light? Did they reinforce the lip or did they not reinforce the lip? Did they care at all about the feet of the pot or did they just phone it in? Did they add details that aren't seeable once you put a tree in it? Or did they leave the insides and undersides completely unembellished? Are the pots true? Picking them up, sighting a line, and you can tell, are the pots lopsided? Is there a good side and a bad side? Or are these things somewhere in between?
Yeah.
And Roy and I were both crazy impressed. The level of work that American potters are doing, just compared to 2 years ago, is unbelievable to me. Before, I'd say a tiny number of practitioners were doing really, really great work, and there were a lot of people learning fast. Now I'd say the vast majority of the submissions were very, very well executed. And so it became more about truly excellent, like extraordinary execution and or some novelty of idea and or some great beauty that then helped them rise up to award-winning contendership.
Wow.
But it was cool. Like, there's a lot of really good pots. We both just had a blast hanging out with them.
Just eyeballing the pictures here, briefly talking about what's the difference between traditional and contemporary. If you look at the traditional pots, they all look like bonsai pots. If you look at the pots in the contemporary category, almost none of them actually look like a pot if you just glance at them. They are all kinds of wild shapes. Some of them you can tell, okay, this is a container. You can put something inside of it. But some of them you can't even tell that from the picture.
Some of them were just ceramic art.
Yeah.
And that was an interesting thing as a judge deciding, are we awarding artistry or something I could put a tree in?
Yeah.
Which is a fair open question. And there was some extraordinary work. There were some actual fine art ceramicists who had participated in the competition. So there was a level of work that we're not used to seeing in the bonsai community.
Did you feel like have you judged pottery a lot in the past before? Or I'm curious, like, how did you feel you were in terms of being equipped to judge like the workmanship as well as the aesthetics? I mean, aesthetics is fairly, I think you probably have that, but I was curious, like, if you felt like the workmanship was hard to gauge at all.
Well, that's kind of the $1 million question. I thought I would be woefully underprepared to do that, and I'd been kind of worried about it leading up to the competition. But when I got there, I realized there's a lot of value that people who work with bonsai pots all the time bring to the table. And having handled thousands of pots over the last 30 years, I have a little bit of experience finding the relationship between a tree and a container and just evaluating, or at least coming up with my own sense of what technical excellence means. And often that falls back on the aesthetic decisions, as you're saying. Pots that look heavy are harder to use unless you have this tree that's going to stand up to this heavy feeling container. And when things are just plain crooked, you realize you don't need a lot of expertise to know this is wobbly, this is lopsided. Is the artist going for wobbly and lopsided? Maybe, maybe not, depending on the form they're taking. But I ended up feeling 100% comfortable doing it. And I'd actually really look forward to doing that again at some point.
I think that highlights you don't have to be able to make that pot and to be able to judge it in a competent manner, I think. So it's
But I will say,
I'm sure it was a
luckily,
fun
having
experience.
had as many conversations as I have with potters, I did a tiny, tiny bit of ceramic work a million years ago. So at least I have some familiarity with the basic
Dipped your
approaches.
toes in, yeah.
If you can even count it as that, a toenail at least. But I have had a lot of talks with potters over the years and visited kilns in Japan and in the US. And so I know at least a little bit about the kinds of concerns and the things to look for. Because talk to anyone who's good with clay and you'll pick up their work and you can immediately notice, oh, you've done this, this, and this. These are things that most people don't do. And those ceramicists will pick up a piece of work and tell you these other technical things. But it still has to work for bonsai if it's a bonsai pot competition. At least that's what we came up with. How would you judge a bonsai pot competition?
Oh yeah, I think you pretty much hit it. You're looking at the quality of the construction, that someone's paying attention to all the details, and then I think usability has to be a big portion of it. If you can't figure out how you're going to get a tree inside that pot, it's not going to be a winning bonsai pot. It might be a winning sculpture. But I think you've got to be able to at least envision what kind of tree would go in this spot.
Yeah. Now, as a bonsai pot maker, here's a question coming from an organizer of a bonsai exhibit. We're considering hosting some sort of a bonsai container contest and or exhibit, whatever. I don't know what it might be. What, from your perspective, would be either a fun thing to see as a visitor or to participate and submit to as an actual craftsperson?
I'm not sure I've got a great answer to that, but I do have an answer to previous question you talked about is the categories. Rather than saying contemporary traditional, a concept that I had would be maybe have a specific tree and have the contest be make a pot that would fit with this tree. So everybody, all the pots will be about the same size, and then I think it'd be a lot easier to compare the quality of the pot when you've got this kind of standard category. So at least one category could be like that. Make a pot for this particular tree. That might be interesting.
I think that'd be fascinating.
Oh, that's
kind of
cool.
like the bonsai lab, but taken to the nth degree.
Yeah.
That'd be super awesome. I like that.
I think I would, if it was me making the competition, I think I would make a category that was make traditional be very rigid. So maybe even just give people one shape and one set of dimensions, or maybe they have a choice of like 3 different shapes to make. And then they can have some, personal embellishment in like the color of clay and the type of clay and the maybe the design on the feet, or like whether the lip has a ridge or not, right? But kind of constrain them to a specific pot, right? And then that follows a traditional bonsai pot design, and then have that be the like traditional glazed or unglazed, and just see the level of execution on that kind of maybe rote design. I think that would be very interesting, and also encourage people to make very usable bonsai pots, right? If you have that kind of competition to showcase your work on.
Both of those suggestions also model the client-artist relationship. Mm-hmm. You're going to get an email with some photos and dimensions in it, and you're going to have to do that. So both of you are saying essentially it's more of a clean competition and provides for a different kind of creativity with more constraints, being the tree and or dimensions and or all of the above. I think that would be really, really interesting. And then I think you could actually set it up to where you have multiple tree or dimension-based categories, and then let people choose where to participate.
Pot, large pot, yeah.
Big or small, because when you leave it totally open, people are going to just give you what they're good at, which ideally will give you the best that you can get from that. But they're also going to feel maybe a little adrift and not know how to focus or what to submit. A lot of people I talked to, some of the ceramicists said, well, yeah, that's just those are some pots I really liked from a recent firing, so I sent those in. And that's about all the thought that went into it. And I don't know that we need more than that, but I think it's really interesting. I mean, it's a challenge. If we gave specific dimensions, would that sound like too much work at that point? Or does that sound like it might be fun?
No, I think it would be fun. Yeah. I was aware of the competition, and I was thinking about entering. And so I was just kind of looking through the pots that I had made. It's like, are any of these good enough to send in? But I didn't really make something with intention for the contest. And then I tend to be a procrastinator, and so just kind of never got around to really figuring out what I really had to do to enter, and so ended up not entering. But I think having it a bit more constrained, where you have a little bit more guidance, and you have to intentionally make something for the contest, I think would be motivating. At least for me, I would say, okay, I can try to do that and see how it turns out.
How much time would you need for that? As a very boring practical consideration, when does our call for submissions have to go out with these requirements?
Yeah, so I mean, to go from wet clay to a finished pot for someone that's doing ceramics all the time, every day, you could get that done in a week, if you had the time to devote to it. But you might have to make 3 or 4 or 5 of them, until you got the one that turned out exactly the way you wanted. So it would probably, in reality, take longer. For hobbyist people like me, that I'm only in the pottery studio 2 hours a week, it pretty much takes me a month just to get a pot from raw clay to finished, because I just don't have the kind of time to devote to it. But still, if I knew there was going to be a competition 6 or 9 months from now, I could start making a bunch and probably have something done.
Nice.
Yeah, that's true. I guess with that kind of commission-based model, it does have a lot more overhead on the artist versus, hey, this is what I was doing, and
it doesn't take me out of my normal flow.
Yeah. You're asking for more time for sure for the competition.
You use that word, commission-based. What do we do with the containers at the end of the commission? I mean, at the end of the competition, do we sell them? Do we give them back? Do they go to a good cause? Like what would be a good use for all of these containers, especially knowing that they're for a kind of a fixed use case?
I would think a sale with the proceeds going toward a cause would be a worthwhile thing to do.
The cause, well, I think we're still young in the bonsai community, where it's like the cause should be going back to the artists, for all the hard work that they did, right? In that, like, they could sell. I think it'd be interesting. I don't know if they do that in Japan. Like, whenever I walk through those pot competitions, I don't know that you can just buy those. I think they're more like, at least when we were at Gafuten, I don't remember being able to like purchase the pots in the pot viewing area.
Yeah, I wonder if you'd have to make. I believe you'd have to make an arrangement with
the artist directly.
Yep.
But I think it'd be cool to have them as like a. I'm sure people would love to buy those, right?
Some of those pots on the shelf were in the Gafuten pot competition a number of years back. Yeah, and so I know that by default you just get the pots back afterwards.
Yeah. Okay.
Unless some other arrangement has been made.
Yeah, and I think you'd have to like have a sticker on it if they wanted to sell it or not, right? Like. Yeah. Maybe not everybody wants to sell their work. They want it as an heirloom.
But it'd be fun because we'd have photos of these things in a book. We'd have pictures on a website. Yeah. So there would be
I would think there would be
along with it.
A market for that. Someone would say, I bought the prize-winning pot from the competition. I think people would like that.
It also gets us more towards creating things that people are theoretically, hopefully more likely to use, which is one of the more exciting things. Now, I think there is some fun in total open categories, but there might be a way to constrain that as well so that we encourage anything but a traditional design. Say, yeah, do whatever you want, but just make sure the tree sticks out to the side, or you could do something kooky like that.
Yeah.
Because it would be fun to encourage things. I want to see more of these get used. I'd say for national or regional shows in the U.S., we have a long way there's a lot of opportunity to improve the container selection at our shows. And the easiest way we're going to be able to level up is not by importing a bunch of antique containers from some other country. It's going to be through really careful application of kind of creatively made containers. And so I think I would love to see more fun kind of stuff showing up in shows.
That's an interesting thing, though, because we often say an old tree should have an old pot, right?
I say it a lot.
And now we're in, yeah, I've heard that from you. Exactly. That's where I learned that. So aren't we then, like, by de facto counting out American potters in like their pots that would be appropriate for a old tree in a show?
So knowing that right now we're getting shows with a combination of, you'll have typically a very small number of truly antique containers, a lot of contemporary Japanese, some Chinese containers, and then the rest would be mostly contemporary domestic potters. And so we're already seeing a mix of that right now.
But would a tree be judged? I mean, I guess it all comes down to... So that
comes down to
like,
the organizer's instructions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so there are kind of three different levels of age within a tree pot combo. You've got the age of the trunk, the age of the branches, and the age of the container. And so typically we're seeing a lot of really old trees that were recently dug up with really young branches in a brand new container. And so it's like newer, it's like old, newer, newest. And whereas we go to show in Japan and it's going to be a very old trunk in training with very, very old branches in likely an antique container, or at least something a few decades old, with some exceptions to that. But you can see eco pots, Gyozan pots, some of the top makers in Japan, that work can get into top shows. But again, it's a small percentage.
Yeah.
And those are a little more creatively shaped. So I think that could be a perfect model for what we could be doing.
Just thinking about, how to promote better pot selection. It shows they will often have, the species name of the tree and maybe how old the tree is. Why not add who made the pot?
We do it in every book for the expo.
Yeah.
I think every show could do that.
Well,
every show that has someone who knows who all the pot makers are. And to be fair, that's not 10% of the clubs.
Right. But if you're putting on a show and you're asking for people to submit their tree, people have to fill out a little form that says, what species their tree is and how old it is. Just have another line for who made the pot, where's the pot from, some information about the pot, and to include that.
And even if you only know a quarter of them, that's better than not. And that's the convention we've done for the expo both times, is we ask for the maker of the pot and the stand. And if we don't know the maker, then we ask for the nationality of the pot or the stand. And honestly, the number one reason we do that is not to sate people's curiosity. It's to promote the pot makers and the stand makers.
Yeah.
We want these people to get as much attention as possible for their very important contributions to the event.
Totally. Yeah, and that's the only way we're going to grow the community further and have those. You have to have those supporting systems around. It's not just about the trees.
So what do you think we do about that old tree, old pot thing? If we're looking for, a lot of times we just don't have the right container. And so how do we just let go of that old pot, old tree thing? Or do we do it sometimes, but not all the time?
Well, I think that potentially a solution is an old pot isn't always the right fit, right? Depending on your tree. But I think it kind of comes to, like, if we're putting old pot, old tree, old branches as the pinnacle, then are you condemning your tree to not being prizeworthy if it's old trunk, medium branches, and then more contemporary pot? Or
if we had two trees with identical scores and one was in an antique Chinese container and one was in the absolute best example of a domestically made container that was made 25 years ago, I don't know that there's going to be.
There's probably not that level of nuance.
Hopefully we'll. I'd love it if we were at that stage, but I don't know that we're
probably not.
That we're
probably
facing
not
that one
concern.
right now.
Yeah,
that's funny.
The way I personally do it for my own trees, I really try hard to match the origin of the tree with the origin of the pot. So if it's a native California tree, I really try hard to find a pot that was made in California. And
that's a cool idea.
If it's a Japanese black pine, then fine, I'll get a Japanese pot and put it in there. But if it's a Sierra juniper, I want a California or Oregon potter to make a pot for it.
I'm trying to think. The current trend is actually the opposite of what you'd expect. If America is a country of Europeans living in North America, a lot of our bonsai are North American trees living in European containers. We've got it kind of backwards there. But I like that idea of connecting place. That could be part of a display story as well you're telling when you're starting to come up with accent plant stands and or what is the story that the whole scene is telling. I think that actually works really well.
Yeah.
We have that All-American Award at the U.S. National Show.
I was going to mention that. That sounds cool.
That's been all over the map. Some of those have been very conservative. Some have been incredibly novel. I remember, I think it was Sean Smith that had one. It was all metal pot and metal stands, and you get some really interesting things. There was one metal pot in the, at least one, Thomas Adcock's. Does a metal pot belong in a bonsai pot competition?
I think if it's called a ceramic competition, then no. If it's called a bonsai pot competition, then I would think anything goes. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, really, it's he's been making some great pots, and I've seen some trees in them, and they actually look and handle pretty well in in practice, you could say. And so I think that's just another event organizer discretion kind of thing to set up front.
Yeah. So, Bob, I don't know. Did you listen to Now Tokutake gave a talk at GSBF? Did you watch that?
I didn't watch it live, but I watched the replay sometime later. Yeah.
Yeah. What were your? He has a very very rigid standard or expectation for the pottery community in the U.S. So I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, Now is a great guy and he makes great pots. Our approach is about as opposite as it could possibly be, but I own quite a few Now pots and I'm sure I will own more of them. I like the way he does things. It's just very different the way I do things. He's very precise and very intentional, whereas I'm much more spontaneous and kind of just let things happen as they happen. And both approaches can end up with very interesting pots. But the part he was talking about of we need more American potters making production kind of pots as opposed to one-off artsy kind of pots definitely has a lot of merit. I don't see it happening, and I'm not sure if it ever will happen, because we don't have. I mean, there are people doing production pottery, like making mugs. There are people that make 100 mugs and take them to stores or not, farmers markets and so on, and sell their mug. They make some same mug over and over and over again and sell it, and they make a living doing it. But certainly there isn't anybody really doing that with bonsai pots right now. Those of us who are making bonsai pots are typically making one-off kind of things. Unless they've got molds and are doing the same pot over and over again, but still the end result tends to be more of a one-off art piece as opposed to I'm gonna order a blue pot in that shape and he's got a room with 12 of them and you can just grab one and stick it in a box and mail it to you. There's nobody really doing that right now,
right.
And
so why do you think that is? Why don't we have production bonsai pot makers in the U.S.?
I think it's primarily market. There's just not enough people that are wanting to buy a pot like that, and the price that they'd be willing to spend on a pot like that isn't enough to really motivate somebody to start making pots like that.
It's running a business, and I don't know that if you look at the overlap of people who want to make bonsai pots versus people who want to start a ceramic container business, based on shipping those large containers, I think that's what it is. It's the business
100%,
thing. Because I've been dreaming about that for years. But if it's not financially reasonable to expect everybody to be doing their growing or middle stages of development in handmade containers. And so they need to go in something. And so that means we're either stuck with terracotta containers, wood containers, or handmade containers. That's why we continue to import stuff from China, from Japan, because it's a more affordable option. It'd be fantastic if we had people doing production work. But having visited the Yamaki kiln in Japan, oh my goodness, it's like half a city block. It's just this giant, giant facility that must have had tons of employees there.
Yeah.
I've been to some, production pottery places for, tableware and so on. And you can come up with a production process to make a nice plate or mug or bowl, because everyone buys plates, mugs, and bowls, so there's a market. So your profit margin doesn't have to be very much, because you're going to sell a lot of them. The number of people who are buying bonsai pots is realistically it's very low, and so if you're going to be selling bonsai pots, your profit margin on each pot has to be pretty high, and so that's why you have a handmade, artsy, custom kind of thing, because you can charge more for that. If you're cranking out 50 bonsai pots a day and you're only making a dollar on each one, it's harder to make ends meet.
I bet it'd be doable market-wise, but I do not think it would be easy.
Yeah.
The demand is so high. There's giant unmet demand for probably thousands of pots a year that just aren't getting bought because we don't have them.
And you're competing with factory made pots from China or wherever.
Yep.
So the production American pot would have to look significantly better to buy that versus the cheap factory made pot,
or at least similar.
Yeah, it would have to be comparable. I think people would, there is like an American made kind of support local kind of thing that you could draft off of. But.
And not that many people are importing large numbers of containers from Asia. There's a couple now, but not a lot. We used to have more 10 years ago, and a number of them, prominent ones, dried up. And so there's current giant unmet demand for reasonably priced containers. Yeah. And handmade's not going to get us there.
I think ceramics in general, though, like production ceramics, from the people that I've talked to that did that, like at the Pottery studio, some of the teachers were former production ceramicists, like making cups. And like, it's not very fun.
Oh no,
and
it's work.
Not very well paid. So,
or intellectually satisfying.
Yes.
Or
yes. So therefore it's like, okay, pottery business is tough. So the people who are making pottery are doing it not as a full-time business, right? And so what do you want to spend your time doing on the side? Like cranking out production pots?
No, you'd have to start a business. You'd have to commit. You'd have to have a lot of land and a good source of clay. Why is tokonami a thing? There's clay deposits nearby, and they were making sewer tiles. I mean,
I think the only way we're likely to see this happen is when ceramic 3D printing becomes good enough. If you can have a machine that can print out a ceramic pot,
that's a good point.
Then you can crank those out. It's not one person sitting there making it one after another.
And now we're 3D printing molds, and that's
so
we're actually not the molds. We're printing back the negatives from which you can make a mold, from which you can make the container. But that's
kind of where we're at right now. But there are machines that can print in ceramic. And right now they're pretty large scale, and so they're only being used for larger things. And obviously bonsai being a niche market, it's no one I think is doing it for us yet. But eventually, as the technology improves, everybody's going to have a 3D printer in their house, and you can say, print me a bonsai pot, and that's probably until we get to that point, we're not really going to see it happen.
Have you seen the 3D printed houses?
Yeah, it's the same
with
kind
cement.
Of thing. It's very
have
cool.
you seen that?
Oh yes, I have. Yeah, where it goes around. And
yes,
it's
crazy. Yeah, we just need little ones for pots.
Yeah. Well, and then somebody needs to clean it up so it looks all fancy. Cool. So, Bob, any words of wisdom for folks that are learning bonsai and just looking back on your journey? Any thoughts that you have for folks?
For bonsai in general, join a club, get a teacher, work with someone on a regular basis who you can develop things over time. I think being part of a club is really important. Going to the meetings, getting involved, helping with the show, all those kind of things just helps you be thinking about bonsai more and involved in bonsai more. And so your skills are going to progress the more time you spend with it. So getting more involved is going to push you forward. As far as ceramics go, if you're interested in making a bonsai pot, find a local community studio and take a class and give it a try. It's fun. It's definitely not a thing you can just do at home on your own. There's a fair amount of material that you don't want to just. You're not just going to decide I'm going to become a ceramicist and buy yourself a kiln and buy yourself a bunch of glazes and all that. I mean, I suppose there are people that might do that, but it's pretty labor intensive. It's pretty money intensive. But going to a community studio where all that stuff is already there, and so all you have to do is play with the clay, it's definitely fun and worth doing.
Is there a first technique you recommend people use when they're making their first few pots that'll give them at least some likelihood of making something they want to keep?
Yeah, I mean, the pinch pots are the easiest to make. You just start with a ball of clay and you just kind of pinch it until it's in the shape that you want. And, at first it's just going to look like an ashtray like you made in 8th grade art class. But the more you do it, the better you can get at it and the more interesting you can make it. And then you can, learn some texturing techniques to make it look more interesting. And that's the fastest way to get something. And then the Kuranuki that, again, I kind of discovered by accident on my own, is a really nice way to get an interesting looking pot without, honestly, a lot of skill involved. It's fun.
How many holes do you put in the pot?
As many as I can fit. Typically for a round pot, I'll just do one big hole for drainage and a couple wire holes. For rectangles and squares, I'll usually do 2 drainage holes and 4 wire holes. For a bigger piece, I'll put in more holes, as many as will fit.
Oh yeah, that's one thing we considered is whether or not the holes actually drain. We were talking about while judging the competition is a lot of people make flat bottom pots just because they like the look, and then they put the drainage holes there, and then the pots end up floating when you've got a wire sticking out underneath, and or if it just sits on the ground the wrong way, the water doesn't come out.
Yeah.
Unless you put the pot over a gap in fence boards, like a lot of flat bottom pots just don't drain, which could be horrible for bonsai.
Yeah, so I always carve little channels on the bottom of my pot for the wires to hide in, so you can then, if your pot doesn't have feet, you definitely need to make room for the wires to be there.
And for the wire to get out, yeah.
And where can folks connect with you, and where can they find your work?
So most of my stuff shows up on my Instagram page, which is Rough Cut Pottery, and then there's a link there to this online store at the getbent.com. Yes, I'm blanking right now. Is it Get Bent Bonsai or is it just Get Bent?
Get Bonsai.
I think it's Get Bent
Oh
Bonsai.
no, Tyler, I'm sorry. I should have that right off the top of my head. Pulling up my Instagram.
Get Bent Bonsai.
Getbentbonsai.com. So you can get my pots there as well as the best annealed copper wire. Looks gorgeous, soft, holds really well, and very reasonably priced.
Cool. Thank you, Jonas, as well, for taking us through your experience at the pottery competition. That was really enlightening. Any final ruminations?
No, Bob's advice is fantastic for bonsai or for the getting started with the pots.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and hope you have a good day, good evening, and we'll see you next week.
Take it easy.
Thanks.